mainly because of the growth. I mean, growing up there, when you thought of Sugar Land, it was not part of Houston. It was way out in the country and was just a sugarcane fields with basically the processing plant there. And now it looks like another Houston's skyscrapers, and there were just people moving in. As a matter of fact, at that time, after we became aware of that, it was the fastest growing white collar community in the nation at that time. And just because of the growth and because of the people that were moving in and just in droves, that felt like that was where the Lord would have us.
We came over to start with after Richard had moved there to start a church here. We came over on Thursday nights when they were meeting in their home, and then we drove from the other side of Houston for 2 years over here to be a part of this church. We didn't know when we came on Thursday night the first couple of times that this was where God would have us to be, but it turned out like that, and we've been blessed ever since, and we've seen the Lord do some fantastic things under the leadership of Brother King.
Yeah, we originally called it Highlands Baptist Church because of the location. And when we moved, and we just took suggestions, it wasn't any revelation. We just took suggestions, and people made suggestions of maybe this name, and so we collected them all and we voted on it, and it was Cornerstone Baptist. It was a good choice because Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone.
First, my mom and dad and me, and then of course Richard, Jan, and Kevin and Kristen, which they were very young at the time. Kevin was 5 and Kristen 2. And the very first Sunday we had Highlands Elementary School, and we all went there. Nobody else showed up, which was a good thing because the people that were supposed to unlock the door didn't even show up. So we waited for a while and then went back to Richard and Jan's house to have our services, just the 7 of us.
The Lord was providing, and the school was a little difficult, but it was sufficient. That we had it for only, I think it cost us $750 a month to meet there on Sundays for, I think it was 2 hours that we had, and they were very precise. If we went over, they were waving to us or making sure that we understood. They were to lock the doors at the exact time that we had. There wasn't a lot of tolerance if we went over there, but it worked well. It was called a cafetorium, so it was a cafeteria, an auditorium, and it also had a stage with curtains on it, and so we adapted. We could set up chairs and we'd have church. The children's Sunday school would be behind the curtains on the stage, and then we would take there were fold-up dining tables that were on rollers that would stand up, and so we would kind of make a corral for the nursery for the younger ones, but everything was still in one room. So it was there were a few distractions. There was even a time because the stage was not really a stage, it was more like choir risers, and so there wasn't even the kids back there in the Sunday school class, it wasn't just a flat floor, they were all on different levels, and there wasn't much room for that. And I remember once that one of the kids backed up a little too far and their legs fell off of the risers and they came out from under the curtain, and so it was never done.
At one point when we first started, I taught the children, and we met in a side lobby right outside of the auditorium, but then they told us that we could not use that area anymore anymore, and so we moved to the stage of the auditorium. So there was just a curtain between us and the adult class, which could be a little intimidating at times because you're trying to deal with children. And I would play my ukulele, and we would sing. And one time I do remember one little girl, she fell out of her chair and fell into the curtains, and so I don't, and you could hear then the adults as well, and it was just very noisy. All we could use outside of the auditorium were the restrooms, and so to have a nursery, it was very confusing and loud. We would use the cafeteria tables and set up over in the back corner of the cafeteria, and try to make walls, like for a nursery. But I know Mom was in the nursery a few times, but some of them could get away, and they would sneak through the cracks of the tables, and run out into the auditorium. So it was quite, it could be quite humorous at times.
Came time then that we were going to, we were getting close, and people had pledged the $11,700 for the building, and so it came time that we set a day that we were going to put it in the offering. And I was pretty excited for a little church that size. We were at least going to have an $11,000 offering that day, and so I forget exactly the order of the services, but after the offering, I had already started preaching, and there was a little room where we would count the money. And so I was preaching, and one of the men who was counting money was trying to get my attention and kept motioning, "Pastor, come back here," and I would say no, and he was just lipping it, and he would say, "I need you to come back here." And I would say no, and finally he said, "I need you to come back here." And so anyway, when I walked back there on the little table where they normally counted, in the little room, in the little table where they would normally count the money, there was a pile of cash, not just a pile of cash money. And so the fellow said, "Pastor, we were expecting $11,700, and he said, "Pastor, there's $36,000 here." I said, "Have you counted?" He said, "3 times." and just between and a little later, I was attending a preachers meeting near Dallas, and while I was there at the meeting, and other churches were aware of our situation, and I think they'd been praying. And so the pastor, during the preachers meeting, he said, "Could you give us an update on your building?" And so I did. Told them about what was going on, and the preacher just spontaneously that was hosting the meeting said, "How about we see if we can help this church out?" And so they started taking offerings from the floor, and one pastor would say, "We'd give this much and this much," and within about 5 to 7 minutes, there was another $15,000 that was raised for the building. And I know that I can do the math, but I know this: when it came time for us to buy the building, we had the $65,000 that God did in a most miraculous way.
Someone told us about the bank building, and Richard started working on that. And I guess from the time that we decided we wanted to pursue that, or he decided he wanted to pursue it, until we were in the bank building, it may have been 3 or 4 months or so, but then we started remodeling the bank lobby, you might say, to make it a church auditorium.
There was a group that was already meeting. We were at the very first service where they met at the school, just visiting with the Kings and the Gideons, and then it was several months before the Lord moved us. So they'd already been meeting there for a while.
My fondest memories of that building, this is going to sound not very spiritual, but I remember the most vivid thing I remember is like we used to do Easter egg hunts. And I remember doing an Easter egg hunt there every year. They would hide it. It's got that big field out there to the side of it, had that, and they would always do an Easter egg hunt. And the other thing I remember, obviously I remember being baptized there. I remember doing a Christmas play there. One year I got to play this, I don't even know what it's called. He's got it like a German name, but I rang a bell to like tell time. I had to stand up there the whole time as a play. And then I remember this one time, this is random, but I remember this one time that the king had said he was going to finish his sermon at a certain time. And I just, like, I don't even have a watch right now, but I just so happened to be wearing a digital watch at the time. And as soon as he got to that time, I like raised my hand or something like that to let him know. And then I remember him like being like, you know what, you're right, I told you I would do that and I'm gonna do it. And so he like stopped preaching like right then because he said he was gonna finish.
Dr. Charles, yeah. So anyway, the transition was, Dr. Shoemaker had been a blessing and a help, and also Brother Grant Rice, who was a church planter for many years. And so we'd stayed in contact, and Brother Shoemaker preached at the church and was a blessing all the way through, and began to talk with him about the transition, and he recommended Pastor Hart.
And I received a phone call from a long-time pastor friend, Dr. Charles Shoemaker, and he shared with us about a church in the Houston area, and he told us a little bit about the church, about where it was located in Southwest Houston, and then he shared with us about the pastor. It was the first time I heard the name Richard King. And so we prayed about it, and the Lord provided us an opportunity to come and answer a candidate. We arrived on a Tuesday. It was a little bit unusual. We arrived on a Tuesday and went out and broke bread with Pastor King and his family. And so it was the Kings and the Ards, and of course all of our children were small at that time. And we went to Jason's Deli, I remember, and I had a wonderful time of fellowship. And then on Wednesday, the very next day, that night, I was introduced to the church and preached my first sermon, and that was on September the 4th. And then each night we were invited to dine with a different family in the church. So we spent the next several evenings getting to know the membership, family by family, and then I preached that following Sunday. And that was on September the 7th. I taught Sunday school, preached Sunday morning, preached again Sunday night. And then after the services, they asked us to leave and go back into what we refer to as a fellowship hall. I'm sure Brother King has already shared about that, but in reference to a defunct savings and loan, and we had converted it to, or they had converted it to a church. And so we were in the back waiting, and the church voted, and Brother West came, knocked on the door, and said that they had voted and had issued a call if I was inclined to accept.
I believe I had confidence. I had confidence in Dr. Shoemaker and in the contact that we had together when we did fellowship together. I believe that Brother Ard was a good recommendation, and ultimately the man to pastor the church. And if I remember it all correctly, it was a very smooth transition. You know, there were no bumps in the road, and I don't remember the exact percentage that he got, but it was, I believe it was 100% by the end, when they took the final vote. And so the Lord's been in it from the very beginning.
I remember people giving people giving Hunter a hard time because Pastor preached long. I don't know. I'm not like timing it, but I guess Pastor preached longer than Brother King, or so they thought. So I remember them giving Hunter a hard time, and that's just right, story, but I just happen to remember that.
It really wasn't bad at all.
I mean, I don't remember it being, it just happened, and it was just very smooth and seamless, and yeah.
Brother King just announced, he told us, he said, this is my calling, this is what I felt I've been called to do, and I want to make sure you're taken care of. I have someone I like you.
Yeah,
and the arts came in, and it was, everyone really embraced them. It was probably the most awkward weekend ever, simply because they came in on a Wednesday and they were here for Sunday service, and then we asked them to please go in the back so we can vote.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, this could not turn out well. You know, for them to come and what if we? No one did, but it was just it was interesting to go through that process.
I had never seen the process worked out, you know, but I mean, it was fine, and then
I remember meeting Miss Betty. She was my Sunday school teacher, or not my Sunday school teacher. I remember meeting Miss Betty. She taught the Eager Beavers class, which was on Wednesday nights, and I remember her teaching a lesson about lying, and she used a little Lego. That's far back as I can go, but I remember her using a little Lego man and hiding it, and kind of doing this illustration, visual illustration, and that's as far back as I can remember. The church, we were in the bank building. That's the earliest church memory that I have, excluding the house memory with the Kings.
A gentleman by the name of Brother Giddens came by to visit, because he said, you know, I was at church and he came to visit with me, and he told me, we started talking about the Bible and everything, and he asked me if I want to be saved, and I didn't know what exactly that meant. You know, I know that to be saved is a good thing. So we prayed, and he led me to the Lord.
I remember they came to one of my piano recitals like a month after we started coming to the church. We weren't even members yet, but they just showed up at my piano recital. I don't know how they found out about it, but they were just there, and he was, oh, you're doing so good, you have to play in the church. And it was just kind of, at the time I thought, who is this strange man coming to my piano recital? I don't even know him. But then as I got to see him leading the music, and I remember him leading, I forget the name of it now. What a Day There Will Be. Is that the song? Whatever song he was leading. The last song that he led, I remember him leading that, and just it really being. I wasn't saved at that point. I got saved really a few months after he died, and I remember right after he died, and Brother Akram Suhood got saved, and they'd been praying about it for a really long time, and then they were talking all about that, and I said, I'm not saved. Maybe it kind of made me think more about death and about where I was going to go after death, and how you just need to get settled.
Probably my fondest memory of Brother Gideon's would be going out on visitation with him, and I remember it was pouring down rain, and I was a little bit older at the time. I was probably maybe 12 or 13, and I remember going out with him, and like I said, it's pouring down rain, and in my mind I'm thinking, okay, this is pretty excessive. Maybe we should start either putting tracks on the door, but door to door is pretty excessive. We need to get out of this rain. And I remember him saying, one more house. And we walked up to a house, and we knocked on the door, and the first person, he always, maybe it was because he was getting older in age, but he was always very aggressive in the way that he would knock, not on purpose or intentionally, but any rational person would think, what is this person doing at my door? He'd knock 6 or 7 times. Consecutively, then ring the doorbell, whereas I'm content with knocking, oh, no one answered, 5 seconds later you leave to the next house. He would sit for at least 45 seconds to a minute waiting for the person to answer the door, because he really wanted to talk to him. And he knocked a couple of times and no one answered. Well, he heard some sort of noise. You could hear it through the door, and so to me that says they're home but they don't want to answer, but to him that means I'm going to knock again. So he knocked again, and the person answered the door, and they were immediately aggravated. But once they opened the door and they saw that Brother Gideon's was there, he's an older man, they were kind of a little bit less agitated and more, okay, what does this old man want? And he began to share the gospel with them. And in my mind, they're clearly not interested. But he was very pushy, not trying to get them to make a decision, but trying to get them to listen attentively. And so as he began to go through the gospel, their countenance changed, and they were less abrasive, and they were more, okay, what is he talking about? And he began to explain, and then he began to get teary-eyed, and the person didn't get saved, but I remember spending probably 15-20 minutes at a door that I never thought we'd have the opportunity to share the gospel extensively with. And we left that place, and he's like, man, I'm so glad that we were able to talk to that person. Maybe they'll get saved. And I just remember that testimony kind of rings out to me, that he was such an avid soul winner, and he had the desire to share it with everybody, whether they wanted to listen or not.
With the moving from that building to this building, to see God work, we knew we were having to have a bigger building, and we bought property, and then we couldn't afford to build on it once we started putting everything together. And God sold that property. We had moved to this property, and the bank had helped us to get in here. But when God sold that property, we were able to pay this mortgage off too.
But we made that offer, and they accepted it, which was surprising. Again, the men were involved in conversation and kept the church informed, and so this was not just something that we did as a church. And so we made an offer, they accepted, and when they did, we accepted the offer on our facilities. We thought a little less than a year would be in that building, and of course that didn't work out, and we had to seek a different location, which we thought would be temporary, and that's when we moved into this facility, and that was before it was remodeled. And we thought we'd be here just a short time, and then we would actually build a new old campus. But then I started having members come to me, and they really liked this location. They fell in love with the church, the building itself, and just felt like maybe we should entertain selling the land and staying put. And so we prayed about it, and felt the Lord leading us in that direction. And we ended up listing the land, and then we were able to get much more than we paid for it.
I'm glad that God gave Pastor the wisdom on who to pick and on which staff he should take on when and when not, and God's just worked that out, and Pastor's obviously been obedient to follow and and I think that it's evident by who we have as our staff. Our staff holds up. I'll take our staff over anyone's. Our staff is top shelf, top notch. We've always had, hardworking people. Obviously, it started with the Gideons. I can think of, his dedication and always being willing to work. Always have that desire to serve the Lord, and it's just continued on even through today.
Well, first of all, everything I know about missions is from this church. I grew up in church, but we did nothing. I credit Cornerstone. Everything I know about Faith Promise, about missionaries, about how they go on deputation, how they're sent out. Everything I know is from this church. And it's just amazing. That you have the passion you can develop, and you're just taught the right way. I love that. I know that was when I was bookkeeper. I loved that. That was just one of my greatest. I loved having a handle with sending out those monthly checks, and that was just a privilege to me to be a part of that. Plus, and I hate now that I'm not the bookkeeper, I forget the names, but I knew all of our missionaries. I handled their money every month, and that was it's just such Faith Promise is so neat. And when you're taught that it's biblical, it's not just a neat program, it's a biblical program, and you're showed that. It's been, like I said, everything I know about missions from this church.
The focus of this church has always been getting the gospel out. The focus of this church has always been the gospel, and that applies into many different areas. One, obviously, is to this community, which, there's people in this church that were saved in this church that never would have heard the gospel had it not been for someone taking the gospel to their door. But exceeding that, is this church's, I might even use the word obsession with missions and getting the gospel out to where we can't reach. I can remember as a young boy, every missions conference, seeing the way that this church has treated missionaries and hearing the missionaries, without prompting, come forward and say, this church is different than other churches in the way that they see and view missions. It's such a vital part of this church. It's the heartbeat of the church, is the missions department. And a church of this size, you don't necessarily measure success in numbers, but your heart is where your wallet is. And this church has given more to missions over the past 25 years than any church of its size. And matter of fact, most churches that are exceeding the size of this church. And that has a lot to do with the focus and the emphasis on getting the gospel out to the regions beyond.
I feel, my family feels, and I think our entire church feels like the highlight of the year's mission conference. And so it's a big part of what we do. We live in an area where we try to knock doors and live and share our faith, and we're trying to win people to Christ. There are a lot of other churches doing the same, but a lot of the people we meet here in Missouri City, they've already been introduced to Christ. They've already been saved. There's still a lot of lost people here in the area, but it's rewarding to know that though we're not as successful or we're not winning as many people here as we would like to, every day someone is being saved as a result of our prayers and financial support around the world. I suppose this has been true for almost 25 years, the entire existence of the church, and especially true now because of the fact that we support so many missionaries. And so when we're out knocking doors here, if we don't have success here, we're having success somewhere, and only eternity will reveal the number of souls that have been saved as a result of our praying and our giving to help missionaries go to their respective field and preach the gospel.
God has, just as he did for Abraham back those thousands of years ago, had a plan for Abraham. He's got a plan for our church. And it's not rocket science that we have to just put our faith in God. And there's no, you obviously can't put a limit to what God can do. And as far as where do I see myself in that, whatever pastor, whatever the leadership here at the church would have for me, the thing that I guess pastor has taught me over the years is just to be available, right? And just to be ready to serve and to be ready to step up when called upon. And you've got consistent leadership in place that has a desire to see the church grow, that has a desire to see the church expand, not only physically but spiritually, then you just need to be in your place to follow the man of God.
I see big things happening in the future, not even in the distant future, but in the immediate future of the church. And the Lord, through the progression of the church and each phase that it's been through, it's always been the Lord's timing, and that didn't happen naturally. It happened intentionally, because we can get our hands into things and begin to mess with it. But because of the leadership of the church, it's always been about the Lord's timing and what He wants. And so I think that ultimately that's all built up to a pivotal point in our church's life, in our church's history, that leads us to where we're at now. And not that we've arrived or anything like that, but I think that we're sitting on the edge of a major transformation in our church, not in regards to philosophy or anything doctrinally, but I'm talking about the Lord. He's withheld His blessings and He's waited for it until where the church is at today. And I see with the building project and with the different things that are happening with our missions department and different things that are happening with our Christian school, I see that all of the faithfulness and the consistency and the labor has led up to this point where God's just going to open up the doors and big things are going to happen to our church.
He was preaching about how Gideon said, where are the miracles of God? And, God had told him that he was a mighty man, but where were the miracles? And he wanted to see the miracles in this church. And I wanted us, and I wanted our children to grow up seeing what God can do. And God has worked in such a mighty way all the years that we've been here.